The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the marble floors of Senator Lucius Crassus's villa, where the air hung heavy with the scent of expensive wine and roasted peacock. Marcus Valerius stood in the center of the atrium, his scarred hands clenched at his sides, as laughter echoed from the group of patricians lounging on their couches. His leather gladiator tunic, still bearing traces of sand from the morning's practice, felt crude against the opulence surrounding him. "Look at him, still covered in arena dust," Senator Crassus chuckled, swirling his wine goblet. "Our champion gladiator thinks he's too good for a simple wager." Marcus's jaw tightened. 3 years of victories in the Colosseum had earned him privileges other slaves could only dream of: a private cell, better food, even the promise of potential freedom. But standing here among Rome's elite, he was reminded that he was still property, still entertainment for their amusement. "I've fought lions and Germanic warriors, Senator," Marcus replied, his voice steady despite the humiliation burning in his chest. "What sport could you possibly offer that I haven't already faced?" The patricians exchanged glances before bursting into fresh peals of laughter. Senator Gaius Brutus, a thin man with cruel eyes, leaned forward on his couch. "Not combat, gladiator. Marriage." The word struck Marcus like a gladius to the chest. He'd expected another death match, perhaps against multiple opponents or exotic beasts from distant provinces. But marriage? The Romans loved their twisted entertainment, but this seemed beyond even their usual cruelty. "You see," Crassus continued, rising from his couch with theatrical flourish, "we've grown bored with simple arena matches. Any animal can kill or be killed, but can our proudest gladiator humble himself enough to wed the most unsuitable bride in all of Rome?" Marcus felt the trap closing around him, but his pride wouldn't let him show weakness. "Name your terms." Brutus clapped his hands, and a female slave entered carrying a scroll. "If you accept our proposal and remain wed for 1 full year, you'll receive not only your freedom but 50,000 denarii, enough to buy a villa and live as a citizen." The amount was staggering, more than most free Romans saw in a lifetime. "And if I refuse, then you return to the arena tomorrow," Crassus said with mock sympathy, "against 5 Nubian warriors, simultaneously." The choice was no choice at all, and they all knew it. Marcus had survived this long by calculating odds, and 5 to 1 against trained killers was a death sentence. But marriage to an unsuitable bride, chosen by these vipers, might be worse than a quick death on the sand. "Show me this woman," Marcus demanded. The patricians exchanged knowing smirks. Crassus nodded to his steward, who disappeared through a side corridor. The silence stretched uncomfortably as Marcus stood surrounded by his tormentors, their eyes glittering with anticipated entertainment. When the steward returned, he was followed by a woman who immediately commanded attention, not through beauty, but through sheer presence. Helena moved with surprising grace despite her substantial frame, which Marcus estimated at well over 260 pounds. Her brown hair was pulled back in a practical braid, and her plain slave's tunic couldn't hide her intelligent, sharp eyes that surveyed the room with quiet dignity. The patricians waited for Marcus to recoil, to show disgust or horror. Instead, he found himself studying her face. There was strength there and something else, a recognition of the game being played at their expense. "Helena belongs to my kitchen," Crassus announced. "She's adequate at her duties, though she does consume rather more than her share of our food." More laughter rippled through the group. Helena's expression never changed, but Marcus caught the slight tightening around her eyes. She'd heard these jokes before, endured this humiliation countless times. In that moment, he recognized something familiar, the quiet endurance of someone who had learned to survive by absorbing punishment without breaking. "She's also completely unmarketable," Brutus added. "No man would pay even a single denarius for such a substantial wife, which makes her perfect for our entertainment." Marcus stepped closer to Helena, ignoring the encouraging murmurs from the patricians. Up close, he could see the calluses on her hands from kitchen work, the careful way she held herself to take up less space despite her size. When their eyes met, he saw not shame, but a flicker of curiosity. "What's your family name?" he asked quietly. "I have no family name," she replied, her voice surprisingly melodious. "I am simply Helena." The simplicity of her response struck him. No self-pity, no plea for mercy, just a statement of fact delivered with remarkable composure. "The ceremony will take place at dawn," Crassus declared, clearly expecting Marcus to accept. "A proper Roman wedding witnessed by all of us. You'll live as man and wife in the gladiator quarters. We've arranged special accommodations." Marcus looked once more at Helena, then at the circle of expectant faces around him. These men had orchestrated elaborate cruelties before, but this felt different. They weren't just betting on his humiliation. They were using both him and Helena as pawns in their sophisticated game of degradation. "I accept your wager," he said finally. The patricians erupted in delighted applause, but Marcus barely heard them. His attention was fixed on Helena's face, watching for any reaction to having her fate decided without consultation. What he saw there surprised him, not resignation or despair, but something that looked almost like approval. As the celebration continued around them, Marcus realized that tomorrow's dawn would bring more than just a wedding. It would begin a year-long performance where he and Helena would be watched, judged, and ridiculed by Rome's most powerful men. But looking into Helena's steady gaze, Marcus began to suspect that the patricians might have underestimated both their unwilling actors in this cruel theater they'd devised. Dawn painted the Roman sky in shades of gold and crimson as Marcus stood in the villa's garden courtyard, wearing a clean white tunic that felt foreign against his battle-scarred skin. The air carried the scent of burning incense and fresh bread, but underneath lay the metallic tang of his own nervous sweat. Around him, Senator Crassus's guests gathered like vultures, their faces bright with anticipation for the morning's entertainment. Helena emerged from the slave quarters, wearing a simple cream-colored stola that had clearly been hastily altered to fit her substantial frame. Despite the early hour and the circumstances, she had managed to weave small white flowers into her braided hair, a touch of dignity that struck Marcus as both heartbreaking and defiant. She moved toward him with that same surprising grace he'd noticed the day before, her chin held high despite the whispers and barely concealed snickers from their audience. "Behold," Senator Brutus called out, raising his wine cup in mock celebration, "Rome's most unlikely bride and groom." The gathered patricians laughed appreciatively, but Marcus found himself studying Helena's face instead of acknowledging their jeers. In the soft morning light, he could see the intelligence in her dark eyes more clearly, and something else, a kind of quiet strength that reminded him of veteran gladiators who had learned to endure pain without flinching. The ceremony itself was a mockery of Roman tradition. Instead of a proper priest, Crassus had enlisted one of his clients, a minor official named Quintus, who stumbled through the ancient words while fighting back laughter. The traditional sacrificial offerings had been replaced with kitchen scraps, a deliberate insult that wasn't lost on either bride or groom. "Do you, Marcus Valerius, take this woman Helena to be your lawful wife?" Quintus managed between smirks. Marcus looked directly at Helena as he answered, "I do." His voice carried across the courtyard with the same authority he used to command attention in the arena. For a moment, the mockery seemed to pause. "And do you, Helena?" Quintus paused, realizing she had no family name to use. "Take this gladiator to be your husband." Helena's response surprised everyone present. Instead of the meek whisper they expected, her voice rang clear and strong. "I take Marcus Valerius as my husband, before these witnesses and the gods." Something in her tone made even the patricians fall momentarily silent. She had transformed the moment from farce to something approaching solemnity through sheer force of will. The traditional exchange of rings was replaced with crude iron bands, slave collars, reshaped into circular mockeries of proper wedding jewelry. But when Marcus slipped the cold metal onto Helena's finger, he did so with the same reverence he would have shown a senator's daughter. She in turn placed his ring with steady hands that never trembled. "By the authority vested in me," Quintus declared with renewed amusement, "I pronounce you husband and wife. You may, well, I suppose you should kiss the bride." The crowd leaned forward expectantly, waiting for Marcus to show his distaste or for Helena to shrink from his touch. Instead, Marcus stepped closer and gently lifted her chin with his calloused fingers. Their kiss was brief but genuine, a moment of human connection amidst the surrounding cruelty. When they separated, Helena's cheeks had colored slightly, but her gaze remained steady. "Thank you," she whispered, so quietly only Marcus could hear. The wedding feast was another exercise in humiliation. The patricians had arranged for the couple to sit at a separate table while making loud comments about Helena's appetite and Marcus's supposed desperation. Platters of rich food were placed before them, far more than necessary, while the guests wagered on how much the new bride would consume. But Helena surprised them again. She ate modestly, choosing her portions with careful deliberation and ignoring the taunts about her size. When a particularly crude joke was made about their upcoming wedding night, she simply continued eating without flinching, though Marcus noticed her grip tighten on her eating knife. "Tell me," she said quietly to Marcus, as the laughter swirled around them, "have you always been a gladiator?" The question was so unexpected that Marcus nearly choked on his wine. In 3 years of captivity, few people had ever asked about his life before the arena. "I was a soldier," he replied, keeping his voice low. "Fifth Legion. We were captured during a campaign in Germania." Helena nodded, as if this explained something. "That's why you carry yourself differently than the others. You remember being free." Her observation was uncomfortably accurate. Marcus had indeed clung to his identity as a Roman citizen made slave by circumstance, rather than accepting the arena as his natural place. "And you?" he asked. "Have you always been in Crassus's household?" A shadow passed across her features. "No, but that story is for another time." Their conversation was interrupted by Senator Crassus, rising to make another speech. "My friends, we have witnessed something unprecedented, a gladiator's wedding to the most generous of brides." The laughter was cruel and prolonged. "Now we must see if our champion's prowess extends beyond the arena. After all, marriage is its own form of combat." The sexual innuendos drew roars of approval from the male guests, while their wives tittered behind painted fans. Marcus felt his anger building, not at the jokes about himself, but at the casual cruelty directed toward Helena. She had done nothing to deserve this treatment, beyond existing in a body that offended their aesthetic sensibilities. As the morning wore on and the guests grew more intoxicated, their comments became increasingly vicious. Finally, Marcus stood, his chair scraping loudly against the marble floor. "Thank you for this memorable ceremony," he said, his tone carrying the same dangerous edge that silenced opponents in the arena. "But my wife and I should retire to our quarters. We have much to discuss." The word wife rolled off his tongue with deliberate emphasis, and something in his bearing made even Crassus pause. This was still a man who had killed dozens in single combat, slave or not. Helena rose gracefully beside him, and together they walked through the gauntlet of leering faces toward their new life. As they reached the villa's edge, Marcus heard Brutus call after them, "Remember, gladiator, we'll be watching closely. 1 year of wedded bliss, or you forfeit everything." The threat hung in the morning air as Marcus and Helena walked toward the modest quarters that had been prepared for them. Neither spoke until they were well out of earshot, but Marcus was acutely aware of the woman beside him. His wife, he realized with strange surprise. Whatever game the patricians thought they were playing, Marcus was beginning to suspect that both he and Helena might prove far more formidable opponents than their tormentors imagined. Their new quarters consisted of 2 rooms, carved from what had once been storage chambers beneath the villa's main structure. The stone walls wept moisture, and the only furniture was a simple wooden table, 2 stools, and a sleeping pallet that looked barely adequate for 1 person, let alone 2 of such different proportions. A single oil lamp cast flickering shadows that made the cramped space feel even smaller. Marcus set down the small bundle of his possessions, his gladius, a whetstone, and a leather pouch containing 3 silver coins he'd earned through arena victories. Helena carried only a cloth sack that seemed to contain herbs and what looked like crude medical implements. The silence stretched between them until Helena spoke first. "I can sleep on the floor. The pallet won't accommodate us both comfortably." Her matter-of-fact tone caught Marcus off guard. He'd expected tears, complaints, or at least some acknowledgement of the humiliation they'd both endured. Instead, she seemed focused on practical concerns. "We'll manage," Marcus replied, though he had no idea how. "This arrangement is temporary, 1 year, and then you'll take your freedom and 50,000 denarii and disappear," Helena finished. "I understand the terms of their wager." There was no accusation in her voice, just resigned acceptance. Marcus found this more unsettling than anger would have been. "What will happen to you when the year ends?" he asked. Helena was arranging her meager possessions on the table with careful precision. "I'll return to the kitchens, I suppose. Senator Crassus will likely sell me eventually. I eat too much and work too slowly for his taste." The casual way she discussed her own commodification made Marcus's chest tighten with unexpected anger. "You speak of yourself like livestock." "Because that's what I am." Helena turned to face him, and in the lamplight he could see that her composure was more fragile than it appeared. "We both are. The only difference is that your value increases with each victory, while mine decreases with each meal." Marcus had spent 3 years learning to compartmentalize his emotions, to focus only on survival, and the promise of eventual freedom. But something about Helena's quiet dignity in the face of such dehumanization stirred feelings he'd tried to bury. "Tell me about your life before," he said, settling onto one of the stools. "You said you weren't always in Crassus's household." Helena hesitated, her hands stilling on the herbs she'd been sorting. "Why does it matter?" "Because if we're to spend a year together, I'd prefer to know something about the woman I married, even under these circumstances." A slight smile crossed her features, the first genuine expression of pleasure he'd seen from her. "Very well. But first, let me tend to that cut on your forearm. You're bleeding on your tunic." Marcus looked down in surprise. He'd sustained a small gash during morning training and had forgotten about it entirely. Such minor wounds were common in his daily routine. But Helena had noticed immediately. "It's nothing," he started to protest, but she was already dampening a cloth with water from their small pitcher. "Sit still," she commanded with sudden authority. As she cleaned the wound, Marcus was struck by the gentleness of her touch. Her substantial fingers moved with surprising delicacy, and she worked with the confidence of someone who had tended many injuries. "You have medical training," he observed. "My father was a physician," Helena replied, applying what smelled like honey and crushed herbs to his cut. "He served a wealthy family in Athens before—" Her voice trailed off. "Before what?" Helena's hands paused in their work. "Before he was accused of poisoning his master's son. The boy died of fever, but the family needed someone to blame. My father was executed, and I was sold to pay his supposed debts." The revelation hit Marcus like a physical blow. Helena wasn't just a kitchen slave. She was the daughter of a physician, educated and trained in the healing arts, reduced to servitude through false accusations and legal manipulation. "That's how you knew to tend my wound," he said. "My father taught me everything he could before—" She secured the bandage with practiced efficiency. "He said knowledge was the one thing that couldn't be taken away, even from a slave." Marcus watched her face as she spoke, seeing new layers beneath the surface calm. "How long have you been with Crassus?" 5 years. He bought me from a dealer in Athens, thinking a physician's daughter might be useful for treating his family's ailments. But when his wife saw my appearance, she decided I was better suited for kitchen work. The casual cruelty of it made Marcus's jaw clench. Helena had medical knowledge that could save lives, yet she'd been relegated to food preparation because her body didn't meet aristocratic standards of beauty. "The herbs you carry," he said, gesturing toward her possessions. "You still practice medicine?" Helena glanced toward the door nervously. "Quietly. The other slaves know I can help with minor ailments. Senator Crassus doesn't know. He'd probably forbid it or try to profit from it somehow." "Show me," Marcus said impulsively. Helena looked surprised. "Show you what?" "Your medical knowledge. I'm injured constantly in the arena. If you can help." He trailed off, realizing how the request might sound. But Helena's face brightened with genuine interest. "Turn toward the lamp. Let me see your scars." Marcus removed his tunic, revealing the map of violence written across his torso. Sword cuts, claw marks from wild animals, the distinctive parallel lines from a trident that had nearly ended his life 6 months earlier. Helena examined each mark with professional interest, her touch clinical but gentle. "This one," she said, tracing a particularly nasty scar along his ribs, "healed poorly. It probably still causes pain when the weather changes." Marcus stared at her in amazement. "How did you know that?" "The tissue pulled too tight during healing. I have a salve that could help. It won't eliminate the pain entirely, but it should reduce it significantly." For the first time since his capture, Marcus felt something approaching hope. Not just for his physical ailments, but for the year ahead. Helena wasn't just a burden imposed by cruel patricians. She was an intelligent, skilled woman whose circumstances had been every bit as unjust as his own. "Why didn't you tell them?" he asked as she began mixing herbs. "Crassus and his friends. Why let them think you're just a simple kitchen slave?" Helena's smile turned bitter. "Because the moment they know I have value beyond entertainment, I become a commodity to be exploited rather than a joke to be ridiculed. At least as a kitchen slave, I'm beneath their notice most of the time." The calculation behind her apparent submission revealed a sharp intelligence that Marcus was only beginning to appreciate. Helena had been playing her own game of survival, hiding her abilities to avoid worse exploitation. As she worked by lamplight, grinding herbs with tools that looked like miniature versions of a physician's equipment, Marcus realized that the patricians' cruel wager might have accomplished something they never intended. It had brought together two people whose combined strength might prove greater than the sum of their individual parts. "Helena," he said softly. What they did to us today, it doesn't have to define the next year. We can make this partnership work on our own terms. She looked up from her work, hope and skepticism warring in her expression. You really mean that, don't you? I do, Marcus replied, and for the first time since accepting the wager, he felt like he might actually mean it. 3 weeks into their marriage, Marcus had settled into an unexpected routine. Each morning, Helena would examine his training injuries with the thoroughness of a military surgeon, applying her healing salves and adjusting his diet to promote faster recovery. In return, Marcus began teaching her basic self-defense techniques during their evening hours together, reasoning that a woman of her intelligence deserved to know how to protect herself. The transformation in Helena was subtle but remarkable. Her movements had grown more confident, and she'd begun speaking up when other slaves tried to take advantage of her gentle nature in the kitchen. More surprising still, Marcus found himself looking forward to their conversations, which ranged from Greek philosophy to Roman military tactics, subjects Helena discussed with the educated insight of her physician father. But their growing partnership hadn't escaped the attention of their watchers. Marcus was returning from morning training when he spotted Senator Brutus and 2 other patricians examining their quarters with obvious displeasure. The men were deep in heated discussion, their voices carrying across the courtyard. Too comfortable with each other, Brutus was saying. This was supposed to be humiliating, not domesticated. Marcus ducked behind a column, straining to hear more. Perhaps we need to raise the stakes, suggested a voice Marcus recognized as belonging to Gaius Maximus, a young senator known for his particularly vicious entertainment preferences. After all, what's the point of a wager if both parties seem to be benefiting? Senator Crassus emerged from the quarters, holding one of Helena's herb pouches. Look what I found hidden under their sleeping pallet. The slave girl has been practicing medicine without permission. Marcus's blood ran cold. Helena's healing work was the one thing that brought her genuine joy, and she'd been carefully helping injured slaves throughout the villa. If Crassus chose to make an issue of it, medical practice without authorization is punishable by 20 lashes, Brutus said with obvious satisfaction. Perhaps our gladiator needs a reminder of what happens when slaves forget their place. No, Crassus said thoughtfully. I have a better idea. Something that will test whether their partnership can survive real adversity. The senators moved away before Marcus could hear more, but their intent was clear. The comfortable equilibrium he and Helena had established was about to be shattered. He found Helena in the kitchen, working alongside the other slaves to prepare the evening meal. Her face was flushed from the heat of the cooking fires, but she looked up with a smile when she saw him, an expression that had become precious to him over their weeks together. How was training? She asked, automatically scanning his visible skin for new injuries. We need to talk, Marcus said quietly. Not here. Something in his tone made her set down her ladle immediately. They walked in tense silence back to their quarters, where Marcus quickly told her what he'd overheard. Helena's face went pale. They found my herbs. Crassus has them. Helena, you need to be prepared for... Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a dozen armed guards, led by Senator Crassus himself. The cramped quarters suddenly felt suffocating as the men filled every available space. Marcus Valerius, Crassus announced formally, your wife stands accused of practicing medicine without authorization, potentially endangering the lives of valuable slaves through her amateur treatments. Helena stepped forward, her chin raised defiantly. I helped a kitchen slave with an infected wound that was clearly beyond the house physician's interest. Would you prefer I let her die of blood poisoning? I would prefer, Crassus said with cold precision, that slaves remember their place and their limitations. Marcus felt the familiar battle rage building in his chest, but he forced himself to remain still. Violence here would only make things worse for both of them. However, Crassus continued, I'm prepared to be merciful. Helena will face trial by ordeal to determine her guilt or innocence. The phrase made Marcus's stomach drop. Trial by ordeal was an ancient practice, supposedly allowing the gods to determine truth through divine intervention. In practice, it was usually a death sentence with religious decoration. What manner of ordeal? Helena asked, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. Fire, Crassus replied with obvious relish. How you will carry a heated iron rod for the length of 10 paces. If your hands heal cleanly within 3 days, the gods will have proven your innocence. If not, he shrugged eloquently. Marcus stepped forward. I demand the right of substitution. As her husband, I can take the ordeal in her place. "Ah, but that's where our little modification comes in," Brutus said, appearing in the doorway. "You see, we've decided that both of you will undergo the trial. After all, a husband who allows his wife to practice forbidden arts is equally guilty. The trap was expertly laid. If either of them refused, they would be admitting guilt. If they submitted to the ordeal, severe burns to their hands would effectively end Marcus's gladiatorial career and Helena's medical work, the two things that gave their lives meaning and value." "When?" Marcus asked. "Tomorrow at dawn," Crassus replied, "before the entire household. It should be quite educational for the other slaves." After the senators departed, Marcus and Helena sat in stunned silence. The heated iron would destroy the tendons and muscles in their hands, leaving them permanently crippled even if they survived the ordeal itself. "There has to be another way," Marcus said finally. Helena was examining her hands as if memorizing them. "Actually, there might be." "What do you mean?" She turned to face him, and Marcus was startled by the determined gleam in her eyes. "My father once told me about a technique used by Persian physicians, a way to temporarily deaden the nerves in hands and arms using a precise combination of herbs. It wouldn't eliminate all pain, but it might make the ordeal survivable. You have these herbs?" "Some of them, but I'd need fresh willow bark and poppy extract, ingredients that aren't found in a kitchen garden." Helena paused, calculating. "There's a physician in the Subura district who might have what we need, but getting there and back without being noticed." Marcus felt a spark of hope. "I know the physician you mean. Gaius Lucianus. He treats gladiators sometimes. I could reach him and return before dawn if I left now." "The guards won't let you leave the villa." "Then I won't ask permission." Helena grabbed his arm. "Marcus, if they catch you trying to escape, they'll kill you immediately. Is my life worth that risk?" Marcus looked into her eyes that had watched him with growing affection over the past weeks, that lit up when she successfully treated an injury or when he praised her quick grasp of combat techniques. "Yes," he said simply. "It is." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Helena reached up and touched his face with gentle fingers. "Then we'll do this together. But if we're caught—" "We won't be," Marcus said with more confidence than he felt. "We can't be." As darkness fell over the villa, Marcus prepared for the most dangerous mission of his life, not a battle against armed opponents in the bright arena, but a desperate gamble in the shadows to save the woman who had unexpectedly become the most important person in his world. Marcus returned to the villa just before dawn, his lungs burning from the desperate sprint through Rome's sleeping streets. He carried a small leather pouch containing the precious herbs Helena needed, willow bark, poppy extract, and a rare numbing agent that had cost him his remaining silver coins, and a promise to fight an additional bout for the physician's entertainment. Helena was waiting in their quarters, pale but composed. She'd spent the night preparing everything else they would need: clean cloths, a precise mixture of cooling oils, and steady resolve that masked her terror at what lay ahead. "Did you get them?" she whispered. Marcus pressed the pouch into her hands. "Everything on your list. Lucianus said the poppy extract is particularly potent. Be careful with the dosage." Helena's fingers flew as she ground the herbs into a paste, adding drops of oil with the precision her father had taught her years ago. The mixture had to be applied at exactly the right time. Too early, and the numbing effect would wear off. Too late, and their hands would be too damaged to heal properly. "We have perhaps an hour before they summon us," Helena said, beginning to coat their palms with the herbal paste. "The numbness should peak just as the ordeal begins." Marcus felt the tingling sensation spreading through his hands as the mixture took effect. "Helena, if this doesn't work—" "It will work," she said firmly. "It has to." The sound of approaching footsteps ended their preparation. Senator Crassus appeared with his entourage of guards and guests, all eager to witness the morning's entertainment. The entire household had been assembled in the central courtyard, slaves, freedmen, and visiting patricians, all crowding around a brazier, where iron rods glowed cherry red in the early light. "Behold," Crassus announced to the gathered crowd, "trial by divine judgment. Let the gods reveal the truth of guilt or innocence through sacred fire." Helena walked beside Marcus toward the brazier, her substantial frame moving with the dignity that had first caught his attention. Her hands hung at her sides, appearing steady despite what Marcus knew she must be feeling. The herbal mixture was working. He could barely feel his own fingers. "You will each carry the sacred iron for 10 paces, Brutus declared, pointing to a marked path across the courtyard stones. "If you are innocent, the gods will protect you. If guilty, their justice will be written in your flesh." The crowd pressed closer as Marcus and Helena stood before the brazier. The heat was intense, even at arm's length, and Marcus could see doubt creeping into some of the observers' faces. Even for entertainment, this seemed excessively cruel. "I'll go first," Marcus said quietly. "No," Helena replied. Together, they reached for the glowing rods simultaneously. Marcus wrapped his numbed fingers around the iron, feeling the searing heat as a distant sensation rather than the agony it should have been. Beside him, Helena gripped her rod with steady hands, her face set in concentration. Step by step, they walked the prescribed path. The crowd fell silent, watching for signs of divine judgment in the form of screams or collapse. But Marcus and Helena moved with measured pace, their faces calm despite the smoke rising from their palms. As they completed the 10th step and set down the iron rods, murmurs of amazement rippled through the crowd. Their hands were burned, the flesh red and blistered, but both had endured the ordeal without crying out or dropping their burdens. "The gods have spoken," Crassus said, but his voice lacked its usual confidence. "We shall know their final judgment when the wounds either heal or fester." Helena immediately began treating their burns with cooling oils she'd prepared, working with steady efficiency, despite her own injuries. The numbing effects were wearing off, and Marcus could feel the first waves of genuine pain beginning to build. "3 days," she whispered as she bandaged his hands. "We need to keep the wounds clean and promote healing for 3 days." Those 3 days became a test of endurance that rivaled any arena combat Marcus had ever faced. The burns were severe enough that even with Helena's treatments, simple tasks became agonizing challenges, but they helped each other with everything: eating, washing, tending their wounds, their partnership deepening through shared suffering. Senator Crassus visited daily, clearly hoping to see signs of infection that would justify more severe punishments. Instead, he found Marcus and Helena caring for each other with a devotion that seemed to mock his original cruel intentions. On the 3rd morning, Helena carefully unwrapped their bandages. The burns had healed cleanly, red and tender, but without the corruption that would have indicated divine condemnation. "It seems," Crassus said with obvious displeasure, "that the gods have found you innocent of wrongdoing." "Perhaps," Marcus replied, flexing his healing hands carefully. "The gods value healing knowledge over arbitrary restrictions." The senator's face darkened, but he couldn't argue with divine judgment he himself had invoked. Over the following months, something remarkable happened. The other slaves began seeking out Helena's medical help more openly, and Marcus's reputation in the arena grew as his strategic mind, sharpened by evening discussions with his brilliant wife, improved his fighting techniques. The couple that was supposed to be the villa's greatest joke had become its most respected partnership. When Senator Brutus suggested additional tests to verify divine favor, he found himself overruled by other patricians who had grown curious about the unusual marriage rather than merely entertained by it. Some even began consulting Helena privately for medical advice, paying handsomely for treatments that proved more effective than their expensive physicians could provide. As their first wedding anniversary approached, Marcus realized that the 50,000 denarii and freedom he'd originally fought for seemed less important than preserving what he and Helena had built together. She had transformed from an unwilling bride imposed by cruel wager into a true partner whose strength complemented his own. On the morning of their anniversary, Crassus arrived with the promised payment and manumission papers. "You've fulfilled the terms of our agreement," he said grudgingly. "You're free to go." Marcus looked at the documents that represented everything he'd dreamed of for 3 years, then at Helena, who was carefully not looking at them. "I have a counter-proposal," Marcus said. "Keep the money. Instead, I want to purchase Helena's freedom as well." Crassus blinked in surprise. "You'd give up 50,000 denarii for a slave." "For my wife," Marcus corrected. "And not just any wife, the most intelligent, skilled, and courageous woman in Rome." Helena turned to stare at him, tears beginning to shine in her eyes. "We're stronger together than apart," Marcus continued. "Whatever we build, we'll build as equals." Crassus considered the proposal with obvious bewilderment. "Very well, her freedom for your payment. But where will you go? What will you do?" Marcus smiled, taking Helena's hand in his scarred one. "We'll open a school. I'll teach combat techniques to young citizens, and Helena will train the next generation of physicians. Rome has plenty of entertainers, but it could use more healers." As they walked out of the villa together, 2 freed slaves carrying nothing but their hard-won knowledge and unshakable partnership, Marcus reflected on the strange twist of fate that had brought them together. The patricians' cruel wager had indeed changed his life, but not in any way they could have predicted. Behind them, Senator Crassus watched them go with the expression of a man who had somehow lost a game he'd thought impossible to lose. He never did figure out exactly how it had happened,